It never starts as open disrespect. It slips in quietly, a subtle interruption, a dismissive tone, a joke that lands just a little too perfectly at your expense. You feel it, but you hesitate. You tell yourself it's nothing, not worth reacting to. And that hesitation, that moment of silence where you do nothing, is exactly where the shift happens. Because in the language of power, what you allow once becomes permission forever. By the time most people decide to respond, the damage is already done. The line has been moved. The frame has been set. And now you're no longer defending your respect. You're trying to recover it. But here's the truth most people never realize. Disrespect is rarely about you. It's a probe, a calculated test to see how far they can go before you push back. And if you fail it, you don't just lose that moment. You become the person they know they can cross again. In this video, I will show you exactly how to control that moment the second it happens, how to shift the dynamic without emotion, and how to make people think twice before testing you again. If you're ready to stop being the easy target and start becoming the standard, hit like, subscribe, and don't miss what comes next. Because now we're going to break down the exact move that changes everything. The first mistake is always the same. You react. Not because you're weak, but because you've been conditioned to respond when provoked, to correct the moment, to restore balance. But power doesn't reward reaction. It studies it. The instant you rush to laugh it off, defend yourself, or explain what you meant, you've already revealed something far more valuable than your words. Your need to stabilize the situation. And that need is leverage. Because the person who disrespects you isn't looking for truth. They're looking for movement. A shift in your tone, your posture, your rhythm. Something that tells them they touched a nerve. And the moment you give them that, even subtly, the frame tilts. Now they're not guessing anymore. They're navigating you. So you do something unnatural. You go still, not passive, precise. You don't interrupt, you don't correct, you don't rush to smooth it over. You let the moment hang longer than is comfortable. Because silence, when controlled, does something most people don't understand. It removes oxygen from the interaction. Disrespect feeds on feedback, laughter, defensiveness, even politeness. But when it meets nothing, no energy, no reinforcement, it begins to collapse under its own weight. Picture it. Someone throws a subtle jab. You always do things that way, don't you? The old version of you smiles, maybe explains, no, not really, I just thought. Trying to recover alignment. The disciplined version does something colder. You hold eye contact. You pause. You say nothing. And in that silence, something shifts. They start filling the gap. I mean, it's not a bad thing. They retract. They soften. Not because you fought back, but because you didn't. That's the mechanism. You didn't engage the attack. You disrupted the rhythm, and disruption creates uncertainty. When people become uncertain about how you'll respond, they stop feeling in control of the interaction. And when control disappears, so does the confidence behind the disrespect. This is what Machiavellian restraint actually is. Not silence as avoidance, but silence as pressure. You're not ignoring the moment. You're forcing it to expose itself. Because most disrespect isn't bold, it's opportunistic. It relies on the assumption that you'll either tolerate it or react predictably. The moment you do neither, you become something harder to categorize. And what cannot be easily read cannot be easily challenged. The truth is simple. The one who reacts gives information. The one who withholds it creates tension. And tension, when held correctly, becomes power. Now the question is, once you've broken the rhythm, what do you do next? Most people think the next move is to correct the disrespect, to call it out, to push back, to reclaim control through force. But that's still reaction. It's louder, sharper, more assertive. But it's still predictable, and predictability is exactly what gave them the confidence to test you in the first place. What they expect is resistance. What they don't expect is exposure. Because once the rhythm is broken, the real advantage begins. You make them confront what they just did, without ever raising your voice. You don't attack. You don't insult. You don't escalate. You simply hold the moment still and redirect it back at them with precision. Something as simple as, "You meant that how?" Or "Do you want to say that again?" Delivered without emotion, without tension, without urgency. And suddenly the dynamic flips. Now they're no longer observing your reaction. They're evaluating their own words. This is the psychological pivot. Disrespect thrives in ambiguity. It hides behind humor, tone, implication. But the moment you isolate it and bring it into clarity, it loses its protection. They're forced to either own it or retreat from it. And most people won't own it. Because most people who test boundaries aren't dominant. They're opportunistic. They rely on you staying unclear so they never have to fully commit. Watch how this plays out. Someone says, "Relax, I was just joking." The old version of you nods, laughs it off, lets it slide to keep things smooth. The disciplined version pauses, looks at them and says calmly, "Explain the joke, no aggression, no sarcasm, just clarity." And now they hesitate. Because explaining it would expose the intent behind it. They backtrack, they soften, the room shifts, not because you dominated them, but because you made them conscious of themselves. And self-consciousness is the beginning of restraint. This is where power becomes quiet. You're not trying to win the moment. You're reshaping how future moments will unfold. Because when someone realizes they can't casually test you without being pulled into the light, they begin to calculate. They choose their words more carefully. Their tone changes, not out of fear, but out of uncertainty. And uncertainty is more powerful than intimidation. Fear can be challenged. Uncertainty makes people hesitate before they even act. But this only works if it's consistent. One controlled response is impressive. Two is noticed. But consistency, that's when it becomes identity. Because here's the deeper layer most people miss. People don't respect isolated actions. They respect patterns. If you hold frame once but return to being easygoing, accommodating, overly accessible, the signal collapses. The door reopens. And they will test it again, just more subtly this time. A lighter joke, a smaller dismissal, a softer boundary push, not to attack you, but to see if that version of you was real or just a moment. So you don't return to normal, you recalibrate. Your tone becomes more deliberate, your responses shorter, your availability more selective. You don't announce the change, you embody it. They feel the difference without being told. Invitations you once accepted easily, you now decline without explanation. Conversations that used to flow freely now have pauses, filters, edges, not cold, controlled. And that control communicates something no explanation ever could. Access to you is no longer assumed. The truth is this: respect is not built in the moment you respond. It's built in what you refuse to return to after it. What most people fail to understand is this: the moment of disrespect is never the real test. The real test begins after. Because once you've disrupted the rhythm and exposed the behavior, the environment doesn't reset. It recalibrates. And everyone around you is watching, not just for what you did, but for what you'll tolerate next. This is where power either solidifies or quietly dissolves. Because people don't usually repeat the same move, they adapt. The next test won't look like the first. It will be softer, disguised, almost deniable. A comment delivered with a smile. A decision made without including you, framed as an oversight. A slight shift in tone that invites you to question whether it was even intentional. And this is where most people lose control again. Not because they didn't respond the first time, but because they hesitate the second. They overthink, they rationalize, they give the benefit of the doubt. And in doing so, they slowly reopen the door they just closed. But controlled presence doesn't rely on interpretation. It relies on pattern recognition. You don't ask, was that disrespect? You observe, does this align with the boundary I just set? And if it doesn't, you reinforce. Not louder, not more emotional, but more decisive. Because here's the principle most people resist. If the consequence matches the offense, it's forgettable. If it exceeds it, it becomes a reference point, and reference points shape behavior. So the second time it happens, your response shifts from clarity to removal, not dramatic, not confrontational, just absence. They make a subtle jab in a group setting. You don't engage with them anymore. You redirect your attention, continue the conversation with others. They ask you something directly, trying to pull you back in. You give a minimal answer, then disengage. No hostility, no explanation, just a closed loop. And that's when it lands. Because what you've removed isn't just your response. It's your access. And access is what people value most when they realize it's no longer guaranteed. This is where the psychology deepens. Being ignored by someone who once acknowledged you creates more internal tension than being challenged directly. Because confrontation gives them something to push against. Absence gives them nothing. No friction. No feedback. Just a quiet signal. Something has changed and you're no longer inside it. And that uncertainty forces them to reevaluate their position. Not because you demanded respect, but because you withdrew the environment where disrespect was possible. Most people won't do this. They'll try to smooth it out, rebalance the energy, reconnect. Because they've been taught that being the bigger person means restoring comfort. But comfort is not what creates respect. Clarity does, and clarity without consequence is ignored. This is why Machiavellian thinking doesn't revolve around fairness. It revolves around effectiveness. You're not trying to be understood. You're establishing a boundary that carries weight. And here's where the real shift happens. Your response is no longer about them. It's about the room. Because every interaction is observed, directly or indirectly. People notice who gets challenged and who doesn't. They notice who explains and who simply withdraws. And over time, those observations form a reputation. Not through what you say, but through what people learn about you without being told. The truth is simple. People don't adjust to your words. They adjust to your patterns. And once your pattern becomes clear, the dynamic changes before anything even happens. At this point, most people think the work is done. You've held silence, exposed the behavior, reinforced the boundary, and now things feel different. The tone around you shifts. People are more careful, more measured. But here's where the deeper game begins. Because respect is not maintained by what you do once. It's maintained by what people can't predict about you next. Predictability invites strategy. And once someone believes they understand your pattern, they begin to navigate around it. This is why the next evolution isn't about being harsher. It's about becoming harder to read. Not chaotic, not inconsistent, but selectively controlled. You don't respond to everything. You don't engage every time. Sometimes you let things pass without acknowledgement. Other times, you intervene with sharp precision. And that contrast creates something far more powerful than dominance. It creates uncertainty, because now the question in their mind is no longer will they react, but when and how. And that question alone is enough to change behavior before it even reaches you. Think about it. The old version of you was easy to map. If someone pushed, you either explained or tolerated. If they joked, you laughed along. If they crossed a line, you tried to smooth it over. There was a pattern, and patterns can be studied. The disciplined version breaks that cycle. One moment you remain completely silent. Another moment you step in with a single controlled sentence that resets the entire interaction. No escalation, no repetition. Just enough to remind them there is a boundary here and it doesn't need to be announced twice. This is what Machiavelli meant when he warned against being too transparent, too consistent, too easy to understand. Because the moment people feel they've figured you out, they stop respecting the unknown. And the unknown is where your leverage lives. You don't need to intimidate. You don't need to dominate the room. You simply become someone whose response cannot be anticipated and that forces others to regulate themselves around you. You'll start to notice subtle shifts. Conversations slow down when you enter. People think before they speak. The casual tone disappears. Not because you demanded it, but because your presence now carries a question mark. And the human mind naturally avoids what it cannot fully predict. This is not about fear, it's about friction, a quiet resistance that makes people adjust without being told. Here's the psychological inversion most people miss. Respect is not built on being liked. It's built on being felt. Liked people are approached casually. Felt people are approached carefully. And that difference is everything. When your presence creates even a slight pause in how others speak, how they frame their words, how they position themselves, you've shifted from participant to reference point. You're no longer reacting to the environment. The environment is adjusting to you. But this only works if you detach from the need to be understood. The moment you start explaining your behavior, justifying your distance, or clarifying your intent, you collapse the mystery. You make yourself readable again. And once you're readable, you're manageable. So you let people interpret you however they want. Cold, distant, focused, it doesn't matter. Because perception, not explanation, is what shapes how they move around you. The truth is this: the less they understand you, the more carefully they treat you. And when that becomes your baseline, something deeper begins to change. And this is where the final shift happens. The moment you stop taking disrespect personally, because as long as you see it as an attack on you, you will always feel the pull to react, to correct, to defend something internal. But once you step outside of that frame, everything changes. You stop asking, "Why would they say that to me?" and start seeing it for what it really is. Information, a signal, a glimpse into their insecurity, their need for control, their attempt to elevate themselves by lowering someone else. And the moment you see it that way, the emotional charge disappears. You're no longer inside the interaction, you're observing it. Most people hear disrespect and feel something collapse inside them. Their focus turns inward. Am I being judged? Did I look weak? Should I say something? But you shift the direction completely. You look outward. What does this reveal about them? What are they trying to gain? Where is the imbalance? And in that shift, you regain control. Because now you're not reacting to pressure, you're analyzing it. You're deciding what this person just earned from you. More access or none at all. Picture this. Someone makes a subtle dig, expecting you to engage. The old version of you feels it immediately, tries to recalibrate, maybe even prove something in the next few minutes. The disciplined version doesn't move. You register it and you log it. No reaction, no correction, no visible shift. But internally, something final happens. You've adjusted their position in your world. Maybe they no longer get your attention in group settings. Maybe future interactions become shorter, more transactional. Maybe they disappear from your circle entirely without explanation. And that's the part most people underestimate. Power is not always in confrontation. Sometimes it's in quiet reclassification. Because once someone realizes they no longer have access to the version of you they were interacting with, the dynamic fractures. They might try to re-enter, become more polite, more careful, even apologetic in subtle ways. And here comes the moment that defines your level of control. You don't rush to restore what was lost. You don't reward correction with immediate warmth. You remain unchanged, not cold, not bitter, just unmoved. And that creates something far more unsettling than punishment. It creates distance without hostility. A silent message: you no longer matter in the same way. This is what Machiavellian control looks like at its highest level. Not domination, not revenge, but detachment with precision. You're not trying to hurt them. You're removing the space where they could affect you. And in doing so, you reshape how they exist around you. Because people don't fear loud reactions. They fear losing position. They fear becoming irrelevant in a space where they once had presence. Over time, this compounds. Your name starts carrying weight, not because you demanded it, but because of how you handled moments no one else could see clearly. People remember how you didn't react, how you didn't explain, how you simply adjusted and moved on. And that memory becomes your reputation. Not someone who fights for respect, but someone who makes disrespect too costly to attempt. The truth is this: the moment you stop needing to respond is the moment you become untouchable. You see it now. Disrespect was never about the words. It was about what you allowed to move you. There will be moments where you feel the pull, the urge to explain your intent, to correct how they see you, to prove you are not what they implied, to fix the tension so things feel normal again. And in that split second, your mind will tell you that silence makes you look weak, that restraint makes you lose control, that if you do not respond, you lose the moment. But the truth is colder than that. The moment you rush to defend, you step into their frame. The moment you stay still, they fall out of it. They start adjusting, rephrasing, second-guessing, not because you overpowered them, but because you did not give them anything to push against. And without resistance, their move collapses. This is the shift, from reaction to self-command. from impulse to discipline, from noise to clarity. You are no longer trying to control how they see you. You control what they are allowed to see. If this made something clear, subscribe and comment silent strength, because the one who does not react is the one no one dares to test twice.